Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, we'll masech the Sanhedrin daf Mem Zayin. We are going to begin on the very top of Mem Zayin, but off the top line. So we were learning whether or not, when it comes to a hesped, is it for the honor of the living or is it the honor of the person who had died? And the nafkamina is, what if the person said, "Do not provide a hesped for me," and then that person dies? So if you, or alternatively, if we require that the monies must be taken from the Yorshim, so that this way a hesped will take place. So again, if it's totally on the honor of the person, so he could forgo his honor. If it's based on the honor of the people, so then they could say, you know what, I don't want to have to pay for this hesped. Okay, so then we didn't have an answer. We went back and forth. Now we have another. We're going to try to bring another ayat, Tashma. So the pasuk in Tehillim says, "Nivz be'ein of nimos." What is disgrace in his eyes will fall apart. Basically, it says Rashi, "Ksim miyalu b'har Hashem." Who is someone who is naki to Hashem? Miyalu b'har Hashem. Who's going to go up to Hashem? Naki kapayim b'var levav. V'kachashem namiho. And this is also mentioned. Zeh Chizkiyahu melech Yehuda. This is referring to Chizkiyahu, Shegirat Samois Ovev Almita Shel Chavalim. So Chizkiyahu, of course, was a great tzaddik. His father was not, and he dragged his father's bones derech bezoyan, because his father was a Rasha, in this fashion, and he was actually praised for having done so. Now, if the purpose of a hesped is for the person who's alive, my taima it's in order that there should be a kapara for the father. So umishum kapara de avua, because of the honor for your father, mashule likardi Israel, we're going to delay the honor to Israel. Says Rashi, v'iyamrit kavod shayis lameis. If you want to tell me that the cover that we do for a mace is not really for the mace, but for the person who's alive, so my tama ovid hachi lama bizes achayim. Apparently, it's a disgrace to him. So he answers, Yisrael gufayu nichelhu demichle yekurayu legabe. Actually, it's good for the person themselves to be moichel their kavod. Says Rashi, nothing. Tashma. Ormulhen, so if they said to them, Al tispeduni, do not eulogize me, which is basically the question, do we do that? So by Yorais in the cities. Says Rabbin Kodesh Sivas Banov. Sivas Banov. This was a commandment that he gave to his kids. Avol bekrachim gedolim, in big places, diki inchi tuva, there's a lot of people there. Mechanfim mayoris namil hasam. So maybe he's making a distinction between the location. Now, if it's the honor of the living person, my naklimina. So what does it matter where it's being done? Because it's going to cause more covered for the person. Tashma. Now, you're not supposed to let the body remain for an extended period of time. However, if there is a benefit in doing so, for example, you don't have a proper casket or the proper shrouds, then you're not going to be over by waiting. So my lab, the reason is because you're showing honor to the mace. So the Gemara says, just because we're trying to honor the living, then we're going to leave the mace around. Doesn't make sense. So it's the truth is, we would rather have the mace lie around because of the honor of the living, making sure it's done properly. When it says not to hang a body, which this is referring to someone who killed or did some punishment, did something that deserves the punishment of Misa, so that after they're sentenced to death, then their body is hung for a short amount of time. So we say, Luson of Losol 8, Dumid the Tliya, the Isbe Bezayan. So it's a Tliya in which there's an embarrassment of Al-Hachakim on the Isbe Bezayan low. The whole issue is that you don't want there to be a Bezayan, but over here there's no Bezayan Hames, because there's nothing that's going on. The whole issue of Losolin is doing something which is a bizayon. Tashma, halinu l'chvaydai, if let's say you left him for his honor, with shmoil of ayaros, in order that he should hear from cities, eulogies, ohavilo miknainais, so there should be kindness against people who are mourning. Ohavilo on the tachrichem inu of love. So it says beferish, because we said before, you're not over. Shekol eisa inu el chvayda shomeis. It says beferish, that's done with chvayda shomeis. Now hakam kol eisa chvayda sholchai ein bo bezayin lemeis. It just means anything was done for the covenant of the living is not a bezayin to the mace. So Tashma, Rav Nasan Omer, simin yafu mace. This is actually the answer. Finally, a simin yafu for a mace is shenifrayin mimenu ach misa, is that they will collect from him after misa. Mace shel nifsbad, a mace that did not have a eulogy, or nikvar was not buried, or shechayi goyrasai, or he was being dragged, or shahayu geshamim mizalfin al mitasai, or water dripping on his casket. Zeu simin yavel mace. These are all good for the sign for the mace. Shmamina yikar nishachvi hu shmamina. It shows that the purpose of mourning, of eulogizing, is for the mace. That's the raya. Says Rashi, the fact that he's being paid in this world for his wrongdoing, there's a kapara in all these different things happening. If it has nothing to do with the mace, then why is there a kapara? It must be, the fact that there's a kapara must mean that the whole thing is for the mace. This is question, we finally got to question 11. So you end up saying that it's the honor of the mace. Since Rav Nosson says a mace shlo nispeit, if there's no proper eulogy or burial, zeu simin yaful a mace. V'ila v'ikar d'shechvi hu lo hay maschaper b'bizayin. So the bizayin of not being buried proper, or not having a hesped, that is a kapara. And therefore, it obviously shows this is all for the sake of the mace. Very clear that is the question and the answer, which is the same as TB 27. The same answer I wrote. Homaskani yikar d'shechvi beglal imhu oimer shani loitzah zeh o l'shalim es hayarshim v'im ein loy zeh siman bracha toiv l'meis. It's not exactly what the answer is. Again, if he's not buried, etc. That's what it's talking about. Okay. Let's keep going. Okay. So we don't want the rasha to be buried next to the tzaddik, and therefore we have them buried separately, at least until the body decomposes. Then afterwards they can bring the body to their ancestral plot. So how do we know they shouldn't be buried next to each other? When you bury a person, and you see the troops, and he was thrown into the kever. It says, that he went and touched the bones. He came to life. He stood up on his feet. Says Rashi, the one who was buried, Navi Sheker Hayu. He was a Navi Sheker. Hanavi Asher Heshiv as Idoi Le'echel V'lishtos Mebeis El. The one who told Idoi to eat and drink. V'nenesh Idoi al Yadai was punished through this. Misu Ha'ari, and the lion consumed him. Ukshemes, and when he died, after some time, Kavru Eitz Elisha. So this guy was buried next to Elisha. So it's a Russia next to a tzaddik. It wasn't something which was a good thing, so therefore he came back to life. Armale Rapapa Vidilma Lekume Vihina Pi Shnayim Beruchachal Eli. Maybe it's just coming to establish this pasuk, says Rashi, that Eliyahu Achai as a mace. That Eliyahu can bring the dead back to life. It was to him to bring to life two ma'asim. This is referring to the son of Shunamis. So maybe that's what's talking about. So the pasuk says al raglav oimel vesel hoach ela vehina pishnayim hechmishkach slodiachia. How do we have this language of this double spirit? Amalei Rav Yochanan Sharipa Tsaras Naaman. Really, not that he brought a second person back to life necessarily, but he revived Naaman, his servant who had received Tsaras. Shkul Kames, because someone of Saras is Chashav Kames. Dechsiv al nati Kames, don't be like this dead body, which is referring to with Miriam with Saras, or Kashem Shein Karban Rasha Etzel Tzadik, Kachin Karban Rasha Chamor Etzel Rasha Kal. Which is the reason why, even though we have different burial plots, but we will not bury a person who has skil or streifa. We do bury them separate, those two, from the person who was killed, even though they got a misa, but it was a misa kal. So, because one was a bigger rush than the other. So, in second, so if that's true, so why do we have two? We should have four for each one, because skill is more chama than shreifa, according to Tanakama, right? So, how do you understand this? So, shnei kvaros gamar gemir. There was a tradition. How we understand this, that the Kabbalah was that there's only two, even though technically it would make sense that four. Ormalom Rav Yochanan, Achel Chaylev, if a person ate fats, the hifresh carbon, and he was mafresh carbon because of it, the Hemer Daito, and he rejected his religion, the Chazer boy, but then he did tshuva. So Hayav Nincha Yidcha, since at one moment he was puzzled to be able to bring a carbon because he was a mummer, so therefore, because of that, the karma becomes possible. It doesn't matter the fact that he may have eventually have done tshuva. That doesn't make any difference. Still, it will not work. Right now, we want something similar to this. Rav Yirmi, Rav Avoy, Rav Yochanan, Achel Chaylev. If a person can eat these fats, the hifresh carbon, your mafresh carbon, and here it says v'nishtata. Let's say it was a shaita, the chazer v'nishtapa, and then you were healed. That once you're pushed off, once it's pushed off, and it cannot be brought as a carbon, even if the guy did tshuva. Okay, so this person pushed it off biyadayim by virtue of the fact that he became a mummer. This person who Nebuch became a shaita, so maybe it's not as bad. He can't retract. But this other guy who could retract and do tshuva, so then maybe it's different. This is referring to by an iriti dachas, so the city in which the majority of the people were Oved Avodah Zarah, which is the punishment of Saif. Let's say there was karbonos. There's kachim, says Rashi, behind the dachas in nisrafim im shalala. So even though we burn everything at the town square, but that won't be the case by kachim. So kachim is be'ach imusu. So what do we do with kachim is be'ach? We let the animal die. Like for example, was an oila. Kachi bedek abayis yiftu, we redeem it. So that's a kasha. Amayamusu, why do we let the animal die? Kivan de iktoil. Once he's killed, have a kapara, so there should be a kapara on his death, and then vuliskul gavaya, and then taka should be brought ligavoa. Why would we just say we just kill the animal? We shouldn't kill him. He should still be brought as a carbon. Well, mishom the amrina and hoya must be a raya that once you're pushed off, even though it's true that maybe this guy already died, and therefore because of that, maybe that's a kapara, so then the kapara should work. No, because v'nidchu yidchu. Misavrit mace Mitaych Rishay Havli Kapara. What do you mean? If the guy was an Oivad Avodah Zara and we killed him, that doesn't mean he is scot-free. That's not a kapara. Meis Mitaych Rishay Lo Havli Kapara. It's not a kapara. And therefore that's the reason why he can't have this carbon brought. Because there was no tshuva that was done. Tani Rav Shema Yoch, you would think a feel pirshu avois of medarchit sibor gitma. You would think even if a voice of separated from the darchit sibor, Talmudim Rebbe Alma ba'oisamasa amav. It's referring to people that do the ways of the nation. It says Rashi Yoch pirshu aviv imok shulkayin medarchit sibor kigoin mummer. So he becomes a mummer. Yitma. You would maybe think that you should be tamei just like them. So that's why the pasuk says. Ba'amov, ba'oisamasa amov. Says Rashi, the imulav al yitma fil sheiro amulu kipro misasai imul chazbo. There's no tshuva over here. So therefore, he doesn't get a kapara. Amli Rabba mika medamis nerug b'taich rishai l'meis b'taich rishai. How can you compare one person who was killed while he was a rush as opposed to being sentenced to death? Meis b'taich rishai kivandachi urchei kamayis. Since he died in a normal way, we'll have a kapara. However, nerag b'taich rishai kivandalav ki urchei. It's not the normal way to die by being murdered. So meis havile kapara. So maybe there's a distinction between just dying naturally and being murdered. Maybe murder in itself is a stronger kapara. So Teda Techsiv, the pasuk says in Tehillah Mizmo Yosef Elokim Bo Goy Benachlascha Timu Es Heichel Kodshecha. So Rematalma the Heichel Begoymer. So Nosno Es Nivlas Avadecha Machel Oif Hashemayim. Basar chasidcha lachyois eretz. So my avadecha, my chasidecha, are your servants? What is this kindness, this righteousness? Lav chasidcha, chasidecha mamish. Avadecha hanoch de mechayvi dina de mikara v'kivan de iktul karilu avdecha. Since they were killed by other people. Okay, so mika medamis. Can you actually compare as we continue to Mem Zayin Medbeis? Harugi Malchus Harugi based in. When it comes to Harugi Malchus by a king compared to based in. Harugi Malchus Kivan Dishuloy Bedin Kamikatli. They're not doing it in accordance to Jewish law. Havil Kapara. Harugi based in Kivan de Bedin Kamikatli. They're doing it in accordance to the law. Well, Havil Kapara. It's not a Kapara. Not Teda. Did not. Lo Haya Karvin Oisav Bekivros of Oisav. Says you can't be buried by your by the kever of your voisav. Now why? If once you died as a kapara, then likfru. Why do we have separate burial plots for Rishayim? If in fact the act of being executed is the kapara, so then there's no Rishayim. He should be able to be buried regular. So we see from here that it's not a kapara when it comes to at least Misa's based in. So when it says Misa Kvura B'inon, you need Misa and Kvura. So in that case, when it's from based in, it's not Misa's not enough. There you need Kvura, and then together with those two things, then you achieve a Kapara. But since you had a Kvura, so therefore you're already buried in the ground. So Ma'aseh Rabbi Adam Barava Lo Hayim Misablin El Oindin. So we say you can't mourn publicly. Shena Ninas El Belev. But a ninus is allowed as long as it's indoors or private. How do we understand this? If you want to tell me that since he was buried at that moment, now there's kapara, so then this person is a tzaddik, and you should be able to do regular veilus for them. Why would you not be able to mourn or sit shiva for this person? If in fact you're telling me the misa and the kfura is enough for a kapara, so that should also work. So in a nami ichol basar, actually it's not enough. You also need the flesh being withering away. So what does it say? You could bury them by your ancestral plot, but only after the body has decomposed. So obviously it shows that's the decomposing of the body, which is part of the kapara. Ravashi Aimer Avelus Memasai Ka Memasai Kamascheles Mestimas Hagalol. So we say that it begins from the time that the board of the casket is put there. Kapara Memas Havi. So when is the kapara? Mechichazu Tsara de Kavra Porta. That when we see an element of even the smallest amount of tsar by the kever. So Hilka Choyel Yidchu. What do we see? That once he's already pushed off, that's it. So Yahachi Lomli Ichul Basar. Then why do you need Ichul Basar at all? Mishum Dula Esher. Because it's impossible to do it any other way. What does that mean? So Kivre, if you bury him, the Rav Havi Shakli May, it's fine. That's in Dula Esher. That's basically we leave it like that. Okay. Kivre the Rav Havi Shakli Mine Afra Leshista Bas Yoima. So Rav, the people of Rav, they would take this earth for a fever. Also, Amru Shmuel Amruhu Yois Avdin Karka Oilum Ho. This is considered to be Karka Oilum. So the Karka Oilum Inu Neseres, and therefore it's not Aser. Dechsiv Yishlachas Afra. You send the offer. Al kever b'nei adam. So machash kever b'nei adam la'avodas chachavim m'mechuber, and not only is it attached, but also because it's attached, lo misra, it doesn't become aser. D'chsiv asher atem yarshim oisam es Eloheihem al harim haramim al harim Eloheihem v'lo harim Eloheihem. So if a person is worshiping idols on a mountain, we don't aser the mountain. We aser the avodah zarah. Hachinami b'mechuber lo mitzer. So to anything that's attached, anything which is mechuber, we don't aser for that reason. So meisves, we asked the question: Hachayit save kever aviv. A person is carving out a kever for his father. V'holach v'kabru makamachar, and he went and buried him somewhere else. Harizel yikver bo alamas. So the son should not bury him ever. So Hakamai Skinan bekever binyan. We're talking about that's above ground. Tashma kever chadash muter b'hana. A new kever is allowed. You have to get hana. Hitable nafel asbahana. But once you put a nafel in there, then it's asr bahana. So what's the problem there? So Rashi says, kever chadash v'lo meis hazuman el chitz mustam ukshiyamus v'lo meis ikvenubo. So it's a young girl. So halchanami be kever binyan. Here we're talking about a kever binyan. Says Rashi, what does it mean a kever binyan? Kever chadash v'lo meis. Okay, fine. Tashma nimsa ato aimer shalosh kevar saying. So there's actually three different types of graves. Kever nimsa, which is like a new one. Kever hayadua, one which is kind of known, and kever hamazik, as well as the so kever hanimsa, kever hayadua, kever hamazik is a rabbim, and kever which could be mazik the rabbim. So kever hanimsa, a kever which is found new motulif naisai, you can remove the mace. Pinahu minkaimo tahar umoter bahana. Kever hayadua also if nice, so you can't remove the mace. Pino, and if you did, mimkaimo tame. Va'asr bahana. Kever hamazik is a rabbim mutul if nice, so you could remove. Pino mimkaimo tahar va'asr bahana. Okay, so hachanami be kever binyan. The kever hanimsa mitachlif naisai. Fine. So dilma mace mitzvahu, mace mitzvah kana makayim. So shani mace mitzvah the kol islay. This is not a mace mitzvah because people would have known about it. Okay, so let's look at Rashi. Kever hanimsa kagain shu chadash yodeo balasadish shotziva ma'oilam l'kaivro sham. He knows that no one's been buried there. Kever yadua is that shenikvar sham midas bal asad, that he already knew about it. Then you have a kevishu hamazik as a rabbim. She cover b'makoim hilkach rabbim v'tumein ba'ol. Itmar. So let's continue. The Gemara says like this: ha'ayireg beged l'meis, a person who weaves a garment for a mace. So in that case, that weaver Rabbi Omer also Rabbi Omer mutter. So says Rashi. Okay, so you have a machlokas Abai and Rabba. Abai Omer Aser Hazmana Milsahi. The fact that you even designated it, then itself makes it Aser. Rabbi Omer Mutter Hazmana Lav Milsahi. Even though it was designated for something which is Aser Bana, but nothing happened with it yet. So my time with Abaya. Why does Abaya say it's Taka Aser? Because Gomer Sham Egla Rufa. Magla Rufa Bahazmana Mitzra. When it comes to Egla Rufa, it becomes Aser as soon as it's designated as that. So Hainami Bahazmana Mitzra. Rava Gomer Sham Yavash Kachavim. Mavash Kachavim Bahazmana Lo Mitzra. Mavash Kachavim does not become Aser Bahana until it is prepared. Av Hachanami Bahazmana Lo Mitzra. Okay. For Rava, my time loy gomer me'ego rufa. Rava, who says it's mutter when you learn from ego rufa take that hazmana itself should aser. So he says like this: loy gomer me'ego rufa. I'll tell you the reason as we continue Mem Chasmad Aleph. Mishamshin memashmishin gamrinan. So we learn out from this from Avodah Zarah. Lafuki Egla Rufa Dehi Gufa Kedusha. Excluding Egla Rufa, which her and herself is Kedusha. By my time Aloi Gomer Be'avodah Iskachavim. So Amalach Midi de Orche Midi de Orche Gamrinan. Lafuki Iskachavim the Lav Orche. Avodah Iskachavim is not the normal way. It says Rashi. Avi Ta'avdan is Komin Kaimos Bekelim Shinish Tam Shumahen Avodah Zarah Kos Medaber Midi Orche Shedercha Yehudim Lasos Ken. The Jews do this. Avodah Zarah Surul La'avoid. You have to worship it. Afagam b'nei Adam b'nei Noyach Hilkach Lu Mitzra Tashmish Dida B'Hana Af Bazmana. Okay, we're gonna stop there. Let's see maybe another question. Question 12. Menayin she'ein karvin rosh etzel tzadik. So we learned that because Medachai Elisha ish Navi Hasheker, because Elisha brought back to life this Navi, Shenikvar, who was buried within Mechitzasai, Chazina and Shul HaYroyal Yoskein. He shouldn't have been buried there. Okay, question 13. B'ma hazmana milsa de kuliyama, with regard to what does hazman actually aser? So the answer is by Egarufa, even hazman, if you're prepared designated as Egarufa, becomes aser according to all people. And b'ma hazman eno milsa kuliyama, when it comes to what is kachavim, hazman eno sersa kuliyama. So the question is, do we compare to Avodah Zarah? Do we compare which is mutter? There's no din. There's no hazama to aser, or do we learn from Egarufa? Okay. Question TA26. Nerag mitoich rishoy. If a person dies while he is a rasha, ha'im is le kapara. So is there kapara. So harugi malchus isu kapara. Harugi based in leisul kapara. So this is what we said on the top of Mem Zayin Mid Beis. TA26. TA26. So he said like this: Harugi Malchus, Harugi based in Harugi Malchus, Kivan Deshaloi Bedin Ka Mikatle Havilhu Kapara. Harugi based in Kivan de Bedin Ka Mikatle Loi Havilhu Kapara. So that's the distinction between those. TB28. Okay. TA27. Ha'ayireg beged l'meis, Rabbi Omer mutter, mehecha yolaf la. So how does he know it's mutter? So he said that we compare it to Misham Shmi Avodah Zara through Gzer Shava. And then it says, Mehech Yov Umadua Lo Yov Me'egla Rufa Aser. Why don't you learn out from Egla Rufa? Right? Egla Rufa is also Bahazmana. So he said we don't learn out from Egla Rufa. The Misham Shmin Mimash Mishin Yov. We went out Shemish to Shemish. Mashayin Kain Egla Dehi Gufa Kedusha. This thing in itself has Kedusha. Adkan.